Hi, Misha here, and recently I did a video looking at this model from Eaglemoss of the Klingon D5 tanker. And with this, we now have the complete Klingon fleet as seen in Star Trek Enterprise. And Star Trek Enterprise gave us the most Klingon ships we've ever seen, at least until Discovery Season 1. There's probably more designs in that than Enterprise. But before that, we really just had the D7, the Katinga, the Bird of Prey, the Vorcha, and the Negvar, and some variants of those. And I just really like doing overview and complete fleet videos. So with that, let's talk about 22nd century Klingon starships. And let's start off kind of humble. And this is one that only Eaglemoss would ever do. This is the so-called Rebel transport from the episode Judgment. We see 54 refugees leaving a planet that had been annexed by the Klingon Empire. Take one of these, although after 6 weeks in space and an attack from a battle cruiser, half of them are dead. It's only about 55 meters long, but as you see, it's very thick. Very Klingon style nacelles. Has what look to be kind of, steam pipes on top. It's very much meant to look like a river freighter, Mark Twain style. But it's very noticeably Klingon. This model in the series was adapted from a smaller ship, sans nacelles, earlier on. But, yeah, it's a freighter personnel transport, either unarmed or lightly armed, and probably one of the oldest Klingon ships we ever see. But it's really great that Eaglemoss did this because, yeah, no one else was going to. And it shows that even the Klingons, not everything is war-oriented. That was pretty late in the collection. Here we have one that came out earlier. And it's kind of a unique design. Let me move this around for a second. Physically, this is a bigger model, and in the show, it's bigger too. It's about 88 meters. This is Goroth's transport, also known as a military transport. So this is a newer cargo or personnel. Seems like it has a relatively small crew of 4 or 5. Probably enough to run a small ship. It does have 4 disruptors and a photon launcher, and it does have escape pods. And it has a maximum warp of 5, which for Enterprise time is actually quite fast. This is the ship that Archer was delivered to in Bounty, to be taken back when he escaped the events of Judgment. Now, the model itself actually started off as the Klingon shuttle, to be seen in the introduction to Enterprise, the pilot episode Broken Bow, but since that wasn't really seen, it was retooled and scaled up. And it's an interesting shape. I've seen it called the horseshoe shape. I suppose it is. It's just different. But there is something very Klingon about it, especially this front part here, the kind of fork and everything. The model itself is actually one of the nicer ones. It's very big, and the top is entirely metal, with just a little bit of plastic on the mid part of the bottom. So, still a transport ship, but, with 4 disruptors and a photon launcher, it does have offensive capabilities. And moving on, we come to the last of the freighter types, the one I was mentioning and most recently did a video on. the deuterium tanker. This was actually the first time we saw this design that would later be refit into the D5. Although in the universe, it's quite a bit smaller than a D5, about 155 meters. And it has just a crew of 12 and a slower warp of about 5. It has 8 pods containing about 80,000 liters of deuterium, and it does not have the bottom mounted disruptors. It definitely has disruptors, and it does not have shielding, just polarizing and kind of energy dispersing hull. Again, very much a military design, but one fitted for transport and raiding more than anything else. Not going to dwell on it too much since we just talked about it in great detail, but it is great to finally complete the fleet. Now we come to the first truly new design we encountered in Enterprise, the Raptor class. This was a scout patrol ship, also a raider ship. And it's an older design, although far from outdated. It was introduced around or before 2130 and has kind of an interesting design. It honestly looks almost more like a little battle cruiser than it does a bird of prey, although it could be classed as a bird of prey by some. Kind of in between. Size-wise, it's slightly smaller than that tanker we just looked at, 145 meters, and it too has a crew of just 12. A lot of the space is probably not habitable, the wings, and it does have 4 decks, although I doubt all of them are complete. It looks like maybe there are 2 kind of main decks and then this bulge in the back. It has photon torpedoes, or photonic torpedoes as they call them, and it has 2 main disruptor batteries. Has a maximum warp of 5. Has a engine pit. We actually see the inside of this ship because they find it in a gas giant, and we know that it's a very durable design, very strong hull. This was designed to operate away from Klingon fleets for up to 6 months and go on kind of independent operations, but at the same time it could be a support ship kind of operating like a destroyer or a light cruiser, supporting other operations. So a pretty flexible design. Somewhat oddly, it did not have any shuttles or escape pods. Kind of strange, but oh well. But this is the first new design we really saw, and it gives an interesting new aesthetic to the Klingons for the show. Has the kind of rigging and stuff. I think it's a design that most fans enjoy, although they criticize maybe the nacelles for being a little pointy and kind of out of place. But other than that, it really fits in well, and it's kind of a medium-sized ship for the 22nd century. It's a nice model too from Eaglemoss. It's actually very heavy. Even the nacelles are metal. Really only plastic on it are the rigging piping, and it's a good size too. You can see in my hand. But it's kind of that in-between ship, not a battle cruiser, but not as small as, say, a bird of prey. And here we have what would seem to be kind of a related design. This is sometimes known as the Augments ship, or Klingon attack ship, even referred to as Klingon fighter. It has a lot of the same design aesthetics as the Raptor, as the Scout, but it is much smaller, at only about 70 meters. It's very thin, and it does have a certain more modern aesthetic and a little more bird of prey like. We have 2 large disruptors here, one on each wing. Don't think it has photon torpedoes, but could be wrong. It does actually have good high warp, at least warp 5. it is a raiding vessel, a fighting vessel, an escort. Escort vessel type. Yeah, we see this in the episodes of the Klingon augments. It raids Enterprise and does a few things. When they designed it, from a real-world perspective, they wanted something that at first would not be automatically assumed to be Klingon, but then upon reflection, people would say, yeah, that's Klingon. So it doesn't have the rigging and piping, but so it would seem to be a newer design, small new fighter. Again, this is another one that probably only Eaglemoss would do. We know very little about the ship. It seems like it would be commanded by a lieutenant, so a low junior officer. It only has a crew of around half a dozen, with room for a few more passengers. Probably not a very long-ranged, long-endurance vessel. But it seems to hold its own pretty well, at least in sneak attacks, and these disruptors do seem quite punchy. And since it's one of the newer ships, it may or may not have shielding. It may be too small for shields of the day, but it might have them. Kind of makes you think of the early predecessor to the Boreal bird of prey. Again, we don't really know much about this. But this ship, we definitely know. Or at least we know its lineage. This is the early bird of prey, 22nd century bird of prey. And this is actually a relatively new design, fielded by the late 2140s. We first see it at the end of Season 2, when Duras is commanding it after he was demoted. Originally he commanded a battle cruiser, but after the events of Judgment, it seems like he was knocked down and given command of this smaller, yet very well-armed ship. This would have been fielded long before Klingons had cloaking devices, so bird of preys would not rely on stealth. Instead, they were just gunships, gun batteries. And we have one photon launcher, but the main thing were the disruptor cannons. We have one heavy cannon on this wing. Then we have a standard cannon on the other wing. There are 4 other standard disruptor cannons located around the neck and up front. And then on the bottom, kind of something that for the first time we see, there are 2 more disruptor cannons in a turret. A lot of guns. There are a total of 8 disruptors on this thing. 1 heavy, 5 standard, and 2 light. It does have movable wings with at least 2 positions, and is relatively small at about 115 meters, so smaller than the Raptor, bigger than the attack ship, and it seems to have a crew of roughly 18 standard, and it can carry a couple of dozen more for raiding missions. And it does have the standard kind of rigging and whatnot from this era, and a much more kind of clunky, bulbous head module. I think much like the Raptor, it's said to have a 4-deck count, but again, the wings would not be habitable. It does actually have a tiny shuttle bay in the rear here, with room for 1 full-size shuttle or maybe 2 small pods, and these do have escape pods. And we see this a couple more times in the show, including when the human augments steal one. Got these 2 little light disruptors on the head. Yes, it's a bristling ship. It's a neat model from Eaglemoss. It's a little small, but there's a lot going on, and because of all the detailing, it's somewhat light. It still has some heft to it in the center, but it's lighter than a lot of the other ships. I still really like it, though. It was nice to finally get a new bird of prey. And whereas the Raptor was a scout patrol, this would be more of a scout raiding ship and escort. Just think of it as a gunboat to help bigger ships, small, fast, maneuverable, and probably relatively cheap to produce. And an iconic part. And at least they stayed away from the temptation to give cloak. And now we come to the cruisers in the fleet. Battle cruisers, to be exact. And first off, we have the D4. And this was in the episode Unexpected. I don't care what anyone says. It was not a Tekinga, there we go. Tekinda. I can't talk, apparently. It's late, or early. Katinga. Yeah, we're not going into that. But luckily, Eaglemoss did issue this, and it's been in calendars. And so, via retcon, this is what was there that Enterprise encountered in 2151. This would seem to be the mainstay, larger battleship of the day. It's about 200 meters. And so it would have a crew of at least 100, capable of warp 5, disruptors, photons. It does look a lot like a later D7, but it just has the kind of cutout nacelles, and it does have some piping, especially around the neck area, so it fits in with the Enterprise. It's a great blending of the aesthetics. It's a great design. It's not terribly bold or revolutionary, but it's a Klingon battle cruiser. So you can understand the role this would play: command ship, fleet ship, warship, leaving the birds of prey and the Raptors to do the duties of smaller ships, and of course transports, because a military marches on its belly. I'm so very happy that Eaglemoss did this one. It's a good model too. It's got some good weight to it, with the usual parts being metal and the piping. Yep. So as far as I'm concerned, this was in season 1 of Enterprise. And that gets us to our final, the D5. And again, since I've talked about these recently, I won't go on too long right now. This was the one that was actually canon before Enterprise. At least it had been mentioned first in the animated series, and then in Deep Space Nine, when Core says he commanded one of the old D5s, and they were first getting the cloaking devices, so that would have been the late 2260s. So we know that they were in service then. And these were introduced around 2146, 2147, so they were quite new by the time of Enterprise. And I don't know that they were exactly meant to replace the older D4s, or maybe supplement them. They seem to have a different design going on. More avian, more streamlined head. Kind of reminds me of a Battlestar's head if you look at it. It's a little bit longer, 210 meters, but it's actually a little bit thinner, a little bit shorter. It would have around a similar crew of 100 plus. It has photon torpedoes, it has 2 heavy disruptors, and then it has a turret below with 2 more disruptors, capable of warp 6. This one does have shielding plus hull armor, and is also used as a command ship by admirals. This is the pinnacle of the Klingon fleet in the 2150s, and again, it was good enough that with upgrades and modernizations, it was still current 100 years later, which is kind of how Klingons like to roll. It was great to see this in Enterprise, and we do have it many times. First appearing in Judgment, and then a few times in Season 4. Eaglemoss, again, did a very good job. This one's a little lighter in the rear than I would expect. The wings are plastic. I guess they're a little too thin to make metal, so the metal is the center part and the head's entirely metal, which is interesting because a lot of the Klingon battle cruisers, it's the opposite. The rear is the metal and the front part is the plastic, so the balance point's kind of curious on this. Here we can think of this as cores D5. It's said in beta canon that D stands for Devastator class. So D5, D7, maybe. Why not? These all, at least most of them, do have kind of beta canon names in Klingon, but yeah. No reason to get into that now. And there we have it. 8 models from Eaglemoss representing the... Really, we only saw 7 ships in Enterprise, except in my headcanon. And I actually just checked Astra Scientia before doing the video to make sure I wasn't forgetting one. And nope, these are the ones listed from Enterprise. So, it's a complete set. And I think they're all neat designs. And I think Eaglemoss did a really good job with all the models. They're Klingon ships, with the exception of perhaps the Negvar. Seem to all be wins, which is good. I especially am drawn to the Klingon and Romulan ships because of their history in the show. And again, I really like when they do give freighters and transports and mining ships and cargo ships, because even the Klingons have to have support. And it's nice that not every one of their warships is the big bad cruiser, that they have smaller frigates and corvettes and destroyers, scouts. And yeah, this seems to be how the Klingons roll. And I think the folks at Enterprise, especially by season 4, were doing a really good job of a cohesive Klingon fleet that was both internally consistent, looked like it was from the same shipyards, that fit with the Klingons as we know them, but also just wasn't a complete copy or reuse of what had come before. So, I just wanted to visit these because of the new tanker. I guess next time we'll have to get back into the Discovery Klingon ships. But for now, sorry about that, for now, we'll enjoy some of the good ones. I actually do think it was great with the CGI of Enterprise. We were finally to have a full fleet, because as I've said in every video about Klingons, as much as I like their ships and the original Bird of Prey, by the time of Deep Space Nine, I was getting rather tired of it. They just used it over and over and over and over. Variety is definitely the spice of Gok. So, with that, this is Misha. I'll let you go. As always, if you could, please like, share, and subscribe. With that, I'll catch you very soon next time.